Good evening. You are listening to Right on Campus, the UW-Eau Claire College Republican podcast. Good evening. You're listening to Right on Campus, the UW-Eau Claire College Republicans podcast. As always, I'm Ryan, the Vice Chair of UWEC College Republicans, and I'm joined with my co-host and working partner, Tatiana, the Chair of UWEC College Republicans. We have a slightly different episode for you guys tonight. For the next two episodes, we're going to be interviewing each other to help you, the listener, get to understand the voices that you hear every week. So tonight, I'll be interviewing Tatiana, and then next week, she'll be interviewing me. With all that being said, let's get into the interview. So, Tatiana, tell me a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What's your major? What year are you?
Yeah.
Do the typical run through, and then I got a few questions for you.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm Tatiana, as you guys all know by now. Obviously, I'm the chair of the club. I think Ryan has said that every episode. But I'm a major in biomedical engineering. I have a computer programming certificate. I'm a junior. And, yeah, I mean, as far as how I'm involved on campus too and stuff like beyond CR, I do some TAing, and I'm part of a research program with Mayo Clinic called the Biomedical Innovator Scholars.
Wow.
And it's really cool. We are building a surgical model right now for surgeons to practice on.
Wow.
With real patient anatomy. It's all 3D printed. We just finished like our first complete version of it, and we have a surgeon coming in after spring break to come and test it out.
Holy smokes.
So,
wow,
yeah.
Good for you. Wow, well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, what first really kind of got you into politics? What was your Sputnik moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that stand out to me. There's nothing specifically where I'm like, that's what launched me into politics.
Okay.
But kind of an accumulation of the way I grew up and things I saw in the world around me. The first political stuff I remember learning about and like caring about was ISIS.
Oh, okay. I think you've mentioned that.
Yeah, in a past episode I talked about just like it just broke my heart, and like I remember I couldn't sleep that night, and I was like, no way are there people who are that evil in the world. Mm-hmm. And I learned about it because I would sit on the couch while my parents watched Bill O'Reilly.
I love Bill O'Reilly so much.
It was like I didn't, looking back, I like genuinely enjoyed it, and I have no clue why. And I think that's where I was kind of like interested.
Yeah.
And he would do Waters World, where Jesse Waters would go out and ask people like questions, kind of like the first man on the street type stuff. And I remember I submitted like questions one time. Sometimes he would answer questions.
Did he ever answer them?
No.
Oh, shoot.
But
and that was to Jesse or Bill?
I think you send it to Bill and he gave it to Jesse because Jesse was part of his show at that time.
Cool.
But yeah. And then at some point I learned about abortion. I don't remember when or how.
Okay.
But I like was very passionate about that in middle school and high school, but especially high school. In high school, even with some friends, I like did some events like with helping like women who are pregnant or like writing cards of encouragement.
Oh, wow. That's really active.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, and because we wanted to start a Students for Life and it never really worked out.
Okay. Yeah.
But I was like, well, I still want to do something. So I did the like Walk for Life, in my city and stuff like that.
Wow.
And by senior year, I became known as kind of the anti-abortion girl.
Oh, yeah. I know what that's like. Yeah.
And I think, honestly, that kind of really sparked me. Like, it felt good to be opposing the norm in a sense.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah.
And sometimes being hated really teaches you that what you're doing is right.
Yeah.
And it gives you a sense of fulfillment beyond just what everyone else tells you. And you're rooted in truth when you feel so convicted about something that even people hating on you doesn't change your convictions.
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of detail a little bit of that for me. Like when you say hated, like how did you feel that you were like an outsider or different in that way?
So I was somebody who people would post on their Instagram story about like abortion, especially around the time Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Okay.
And I would message them back, or I would post and they would message me,
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of got into some arguments with people here and there, and some of the girls were just straight up rude / dumb, like the dumb they send a meme in response to anything you say, like it's like just to be funny, And so it was kind of that where I was like, no, like, I don't think these people understand it. I'm not hating on them. I just care about this child. And so I started to take a different approach of rather than just attacking them and really trying to listen to them. And I just learned how much I enjoy listening to people's stories and getting to know people and that type of stuff. And so, yeah, and I did have one girl from my youth group came up to me who I didn't know very well, but we went to the same church and youth group and stuff. And at lunch, she came up to me and she goes, "I'm so sorry about how everyone's talking about you." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "In every class I'm in, they're talking about you."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Oh, well, thanks for letting me know. Like, I
you were most
appreciate
hated.
that."
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, like, it was kind of like, okay, well, at least they're talking about the issue.
Yeah. No,
you know?
yeah.
And to me, that was a positive.
Yeah.
Like, some conversation is better than none. And if I'm the avenue for that, then so be it, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's really inspiring, actually. Like, I never knew that about you, and I hope we can. I won't take up too much time here because I want to continue with these questions. We'll probably get into it in my interview, but I feel very we're very similar. Like in high school, for me, even I got a lot of flack, especially around Floyd time.
And then and that's what did it for me then, especially was when COVID hit. We all went into the TikTok world and spent our time getting our news feed. And COVID hit. Was it right after J6?
No.
Right before J6.
Yeah, January 6th was 2021.
Right.
COVID happened in
because Trump was
March
still
of 2020.
So COVID happened.
George Floyd happened.
Election happened. And I started to get, I don't know why, but I just started to get really invested and started to care.
Yeah.
And the year before COVID was a really hard year for me. And so I think finding truth and my purpose kind of helped me see how much I valued the truth and helped propel me towards wanting to proclaim that truth. And at the time it was more, the truth in the sense of like who Jesus was and just wanting to share Jesus. But ultimately that developed into different avenues of sharing truth. And the government lockdowns made me mad.
Yeah.
And I think that gave me motivation to go out and start speaking out. I was dealing with some health issues at the time, and wearing a mask was very difficult for me. And the nurse straight up told me, "No, you're just fine. You can breathe fine." And I was like, "I physically can't breathe."
Yeah, I'm telling you.
Right. Yeah. And she's like, "Nope, you're fine." And so it was like at that point where I was like, wow, I can't trust anyone. Like, I can't trust the government and like all that type of stuff. And then 2020 election came around. And I started to care about the debates. And 2016, I cared a little bit, but more just thought it was fun to watch Trump be Trump.
Right, yeah.
Where 2020, I felt like there was something at stake.
Yeah, for sure. We're all a little older, a little bit more invested.
Right. And when he lost, like everyone else, I was shocked.
Yeah.
And then J6 happened, and everyone at school was talking about it. And we had just kind of started getting back into school at that point. And I was like, hold on, like, I need to say something. Like, nobody is saying anything about the other side. And, like, I felt like I needed to speak up. And with J6, I was a little more hesitant to speak up. Because
during the time, it was almost impossible to defend.
Right.
Like,
but I felt like there was a minority of conservatives. And even though I come from a very rural town where our school is pretty split, conservatives don't speak up. Yeah. And I think we see that, at large everywhere on the campus as well, you know? And so it kind of lit this fire in me, I think, that propelled me to where I am.
Yeah, speaking of fire, and I wanted to call back to something that you just mentioned, is faith. So would you just characterize what kind of a role has faith played in, like, forming your political ideology?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a huge role, I think. When we look at politics nowadays, and I think I've talked about this before in the podcast, a lot of it is so tied to morals. Yeah. And your morals have to come from somewhere. And my morals come from the Bible. I think it is the only really place you can go to where it is backed up. It is a true foundation, and it gives you something solid of, is it wrong, yes or no? And so, like, at the end of the day, my political beliefs are all inspired by my faith. Yeah. And I think even beyond that, kind of like what I mentioned before, I was motivated to go into politics because I wanted to proclaim the truth. And that truth is Jesus Christ.
Amen.
But there's avenues off of that truth, which then gets into right and wrong.
Sure.
And I think by advocating for right and wrong and, promoting what is good and just, you are promoting Jesus. And so, yeah, I mean, it definitely plays a key role in my life and shapes every political view I have.
Yeah. Cool. So I feel like we've covered a lot of high school in the formation. So you arrive at UW Eau Claire, you step off the boat onto the beach, and now you're here.
Yeah.
At what point did you discover CR, and maybe detail some of that process?
Yeah. So I never intended on joining a Republican club. Like many of our members, I found CR at Bob. And
cool.
I was signing up for pretty much every club, like I think a lot of freshmen do. You're like, oh, this one sounds interesting, and this one sounds interesting. And I was looking for the pro-life table because I had heard that there was Students for Life, but I couldn't see it. And so I found College Republicans, and I was like, hey, like, is there a pro-life table? Like, I'm really pro-life. And they're like, and I think they were like, well, we're trying to start a pro-life club, but you should join our club. And I was like, okay, like these people are nice. And I think it was Miles at the table at the time, who's former president of the club. And I was like, okay, like, I guess. And so I got the email, signed up for the email list, got an email of their first meeting, and I was like, okay,
wow,
I'm just going to go to this. And it was weird because it was such a God thing, because I didn't, like, every other club I went to, I, like, hesitated, like, should I go, should I not go? With this, I was, like, excited to go in a way I wasn't with everything else. And I showed up, and I never felt like I didn't want to go back or, like, bored, or even though it's boring politics, like, I didn't really know any of it.
Yeah.
But it just immediately felt like where I was supposed to be. And it was, I don't know, it was just refreshing, and it was a nice break from everything else around me. And it felt like something familiar and something I understood. And I think that's not something you have when you first come to college, especially when I came from a small town where most of my friends believed what I believed. And now I get to college and all these people don't believe what I believe. And it was refreshing to have a place where, yeah, there was some people who disagreed with what I believed, but it felt like, for lack of a better term, a safe space to dive into those ideas.
Yeah. So did you show up and run for chair and sit there, or detail the process? How'd you come to your current capacity?
It never intended to become chair. I just kind of hung out with those people in the club. We went to grab, like, food one night, and kind of I think it was towards the end of the semester, and Miles was talking to Maddie, our treasurer, and I about how, the club needs some new leaders. He's graduating this semester, and the club was still pretty small back then. There was like 6 of us, I think, who went out and grabbed food, and those were kind of the core people. And a few of them were graduating, and we were like, oh, okay, cool. And he's like, so you guys gonna run? And Maddie goes, I'll do it if you do it. And I was like, I'm not being chair. She goes, okay, I'll be chair. It's like, I'll be vice chair. And yeah, I took the role of vice chair my second semester here on campus.
Nice.
That was insane. And then she went to Spain, and so I took on her role as chair, and that's how I've come to be.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's an awesome little recap.
Yeah.
So I wanted to shift the interview a little bit now towards kind of your opinion and your take on the political climate here on campus. Because I think this podcast is really good, and people appreciate our perspective a lot, but we do a lot of talking about current events, which I think is vitally important. But we kind of neglect a little bit the campus and talking about the stuff on campus. So the first question I wanted to lead with here was, how often do you notice, like, politics in general, or like political bias or activism in your, like, day-to-day existence, going to class? How much of a role does politics play in that?
I mean, so for me, I see it all the time. And I think part of it too is when something becomes kind of part of who you are, you're going to recognize it more.
Yeah, that's a great take.
Yeah. And for example, my best friend, she goes to school down in Alabama, and ever since we moved, separated ways, we see each other's cars, like the same model of each other's cars everywhere. And it's like one of those things where I think it's just like, because you've learned to recognize it, you're going to see it more.
Yeah.
And so I think that's definitely part of why I see so much political stuff. But also I think it is decently prevalent on our campus. I mean, we're the number one LGBTQ school.
Yeah, right.
And obviously that's something that, I butt heads with here a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but election time is when we see it the most.
Okay. Yeah.
And
What's that like?
I don't know if you saw today, there was a giant inflatable cow.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Was that, what was it for? I thought it was like Chick-fil-A or something.
No. Unfortunately not. They probably hate Chick-fil-A.
Oh yeah. Okay.
It was the voting people who give out cows, dress up in cow suits.
Oh, okay.
They're a liberal. They're a nonpartisan organization, air quotes.
Sure. Yeah.
But they
gotta get
they're
that.
endorsing, liberal candidaents and whatnot.
They need the tax benefits of being a 501c3.
Right,
but
exactly.
They're liberal. Yeah,
Right, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
And I think last election cycle they had a giant inflatable IUD.
Oh.
Like, it was just the most random thing.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so, so we see a lot of like just big things out there. And just there's a lot of these like nonpartisan or whatever you want to call them groups out there that are very liberal, and I feel like at least 3 or 4 that come to our campus regularly outside of college dems and are tabling and stuff. And, for us, we don't have that, and we'll get
just us.
A few people here and there, every so often Turning Point has come down or, things like that. But that's about it. And so we feel like we're working double time.
Right.
To try and keep up with that, And
it's like that scene. Do you ever seen Game of Thrones? When Jon Snow in like one of those last seasons, he's standing there and the hordes are coming after him and he's all alone. Yeah, that's how it is.
No, that is how it feels, especially my classes. My classes within my major, I don't run into this as much because it's so science focused.
Right,
Politics doesn't come up much. But my honors classes are so incredibly political.
Really? Like, name an honors class. If you're comfortable with that.
Oh, I don't know what the class was actually called, but it was a misinformation class that I took.
I remember you talking about that.
Right now, I'm in medical malfeasances, which is a really interesting class, but it's all about medical horror stories and, ethics and medicine and stuff like that.
Okay.
And they're all interesting class. I've taken Swiftology. I've talked about that a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
My Taylor Swift class. And the members of our club like to say I have a Taylor Swift minor.
Oh, my.
But so they're all, the honors classes here are not just regular classes that are harder or anything like that. They're just classes that you wouldn't get to take that kind of take different disciplines and combine them together in like a new way.
Yeah.
And they're almost all discussion based, which is really it's beneficial. And I do enjoy them, but they are so biased. And part of it comes from students assume that everyone in the class agrees with them.
Yeah.
Because we're on a campus that is a liberal majority, they make assumptions about every student in that class. And they assume that everyone is a Trump hating, LGBTQ promoting, liberal.
Leftist, right.
And it's frustrating at times because then it's like you have to take a step back and be like, whoa, I don't even know what I disagree with there because you just assumed everything I believe. And so that's difficult. I've never had any like major issues with like grading or professors or anything like that, but I have, like in my misinformation class, I had they would write comments on what I wrote. And, we're a little condescending at times, but I was disagreeing with them, so I guess that's to be expected.
Yeah, right.
But, so it's definitely a very liberal campus and definitely some bias going on there.
Okay, yeah. So when you've established yourself as a very conservative person, not only in high school, but in college now as well, and, we are, whether we like it or not, popular. And public, and so how do you handle like backlash for your political views here in college or on campus?
So, it's interesting because I absolutely face backlash, but the people I have formed a connection with and I know, and that do hold opposing views and even very strongly opposing views, I've never lost any like friend or acquaintance to it, and I think it's because of how we handle ourselves. And I mean, I would like to consider our club as the opposite
We
of malicious.
meaning the conservatives?
Us,
Yeah.
like college Republicans,
Okay.
you, me.
Yeah, sure.
I can't speak for everyone in the club, but, I think there's a good chunk of us who are just civil in the way we talk about it, and we try and see the other side. And I think that has always been good for me in the sense that I've never lost any friends or anything like that.
Great.
But outside of that, people who don't know me, who
Yeah.
don't truly know me, they just
Yeah.
know me as the face of college Republicans. They don't like me.
Yeah,
And that's to be expected.
sure.
And to be honest, I could care less
Yeah, right.
what these students think of me.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I've been called a fascist, I've been called a Nazi, I've been called racist, pretty much any buzzword you can think of, I've been called it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, and
Mm-hmm.
like, what is that getting you? What are we accomplishing?
Yeah.
You want to have a discussion about it? Let's do that. Let's go to these events like Bridge the Divide, Bridge UWEC, where these clubs are, the whole purpose of them is to have these discussions. And, like I'm totally willing to do that, but name calling and that type of stuff it's just sad to me more than anything. It doesn't even, I wouldn't even say I get angered by it anymore. It's sad. Sometimes it's comical to think that they really think they're accomplishing something.
Sure.
But more than anything, it's just sad that that's what politics has come to.
Yeah. 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 I think that's a good response. Thank you. So when you are in like a political discussion or a debate, if you will, with like maybe someone who's your friend or not your friend, or maybe you could deviate between your answer between the both. But how do you handle people who disagree with you when you speak with them?
I think you bring up a good point, but is it a friend or is it not?
Right.
And even beyond that, you just have to know the time, the place, the situation itself. Like kind of what I just said. Is it going to be productive? Like, is this actually going to go anywhere? Or are you just going to come in, yell at me, say your 30-second soundbite and, move on? Like, you have to know your audience. You have to know who you're talking with and the outcome, what are you trying to achieve? And ultimately, though, whenever I have debates with people, my goal is to listen. My
Okay.
goal is to hear their side.
Yeah.
My goal is not to shove my opinion down your throat. I'm not going to stray from saying the truth. I'm going to tell you what I think. But once again, what's my goal? I have to be able to know what they're looking for me to be able to say, oh, well, here's how our side can provide that for you. Oh, you care about women's rights? Well, so do we. That's why we're anti-men and women's sports,
Sure.
And being able to listen to people it's just a very important skill, I think, too. And ultimately, you got to find common ground because we're all human. There's going to be things we agree with. We all, at the end of the day, believe in basic good moral principles.
Right.
And I think, finding those and working from those is always beneficial. And yeah, I think too, when you're talking with a friend, you just want to be careful with knowing when to stop and just being like, hey, yeah, this is what I think, but let's talk about this,
Yeah, right.
Knowing
Shift
kind
it
of how
off.
to weave out
shift
of
it
it.
off politics, yeah. I like that point you made just before the end of your statement there, where it was just like trying to remember that. But a lot of people who I have productive conversation with, they don't come in and try and cut you down at the knees or
Right.
railroad you or hit you with a hatchet or whatever to try and just destroy you or make you look dumb. It's a genuine productive conversation,
Right.
and if you can't have that, then there's nothing to talk about.
No, absolutely.
so.
Yeah. And I think, it kind of comes back to what I was talking about earlier, where the way you conduct yourself will ultimately influence how people conduct themselves towards you. And, if you approach your friends with love and compassion and you're listening to their views, they're going to do the same for you typically. Not everyone. There's some people who just want to get their statement out. And those people, you just have to know how to walk away. But ultimately, if you're somebody who's being nice and trying to hear them, you can often have them do the same for you.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So I think now we can shift. I'd like to shift over and get your opinion on a range of current event topics.
Yeah.
So the first one is with this upcoming state Supreme Court election. What are the issues here for young voters, and what does this election look like? If you could give the listeners a little bit of a rundown.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think some of the top issues on the ballot is voter ID.
Okay.
That's a very big one.
Right.
Susan Crawford is kind of anti-voter ID. If I don't know if you watched the debate on Wednesday night.
I didn't get a chance to catch it.
So she was asked about that, and she did not back down from that statement.
Really?
Yeah, that was shocking to me. I was like, you're not even going to try and hide it. But she essentially said it's not fair to people that are elderly or with disabilities. And
To have to prove ID?
right, like it's too difficult for them to be able to get an ID. And I'm like, seriously, like.
Yeah, that's a silly take.
But so that's an important issue. I think that also there's some issues with Act 10, which involves school choice and kind of some property tax stuff and just how much the government's role plays into the school and stuff like that, which like Act 10 also provides scholarships for lower income families to private schools, which is really important. And then also school choice with homeschooling. I was homeschooled, so obviously I'm very passionate about that. And so yeah, there's a lot on the ballot there. There is a misconception though that abortion is one of the top issues.
Really? Okay.
And it is an important issue, but the odds are if Schimmel wins, they're going to decide that before he actually gets into office in August.
Interesting. Okay.
And he called that out last night in the debate as well. The odds are is he won't get a say in that. The hope is he will, but odds are he won't. They're going to push that through, and they're going to get it done before he takes his seat.
Interesting. Okay.
So I think a lot of people are voting based on abortion, and while I agree, if that is going to end up being something that he rules on, that's important, and we need to talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's important to know how he's going to rule on that, and what his view of that is. But I don't think he will.
Okay.
I think the Dems are going to try or the liberal majority, liberal majority is going to try and push that through before he takes office. But he is pro-life.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think he would judge the Constitution based on the fact that it is perfectly within the Constitution to have a law that outlaws the murdering of innocent life.
Absolutely. And this state's had it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
and nothing about that violates the Constitution.
Certainly.
So
speaking of abortion as an issue, what are your opinions on the, I guess kind of recent, but I guess a few years ago now, the Supreme Court ruling on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which overruled Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, I remember when this was overturned. This was one of the things that kind of launched me into politics because I was in high school at the time, and this is the first time I spoke up publicly in a class.
Wow.
I was in AP Psych, and my teacher was kind of just discussing with students about the decision, and they were talking about population control and how now we're going to have too many people and
oh wow,
we need to kill the
what
babies.
A take.
The population's rising too much.
Okay.
And as soon as I heard that, I went, actually the population's decreasing.
It is.
And I got swarmed. Like I was literally surrounded on all sides.
Wow.
Because we were all kind of just standing around talking, and I was kind of out of that conversation, but I stood up to say that. And I kid you not, they like circled me.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, so that was very
You're back
interesting.
to the wall.
No, right.
Wow.
The best part is this was like 30 minutes before I went and took the AP exam.
Oh, no pressure there, huh?
Right? But I kind of voiced my opinion, and I was like, okay, one person at a time. I can't debate everyone. But then I voiced my opinion. And ultimately, I think, to get back to your question, that ultimately this is a win. I mean, we're saving lives.
Yeah,
there are so many babies who have been saved, who have been born, who are now a important part of like their family's life and their community's
society.
Life. And right. And
future leaders, doctors, lawyers, politicians, storefront owners, mothers, fathers, husbands, brothers, wives.
You could go on and on and
exactly.
on. It's incredible to see that. I do struggle with it being overturned to the states completely.
Okay.
Because is murder a state issue?
It ought not be.
I feel like, life is a protection under the Constitution.
Sure.
And I think that, the Constitution within its scope is anything that provides and promotes liberty.
Right.
And so that's a very key thing,
Yeah.
I think, by turning it over to the states.
Yeah.
You're kind of throwing that
Right.
out the window in a sense.
Right, and people like to compare it to like the issue of slavery in the mid to late 1800s. It's like it was a state's issue, and certain states allowed it, certain states didn't, which is similar in this case. But when you bring up the analogy of murder, like every state has laws against murder, but every state has a different interpretation of
Right.
different classifications and then penalties along with it. But at least every state recognizes that murder is a serious capital
Right.
offense, that
And-
requires significant or moderate
Well,
amounts of
and
prison time.
There is federal laws.
Right, federal laws
That
against murder.
Yeah,
right.
and so, yeah, I mean, but also we do have to think about the case itself. The case was about a Mississippi abortion law.
Sure.
And so, was this ruling going to go any other way? Like,
Yeah, it couldn't. Yeah.
this law was not going to be like, oh, the court wasn't going to look at it and be like, oh yeah, Mississippi's actually right, and that's now the rule for everyone. Like, that's just not how the court works.
Right.
And so this was probably the best outcome that could have happened. I am incredibly grateful it happened, but now we have to keep fighting for every state to outlaw abortion.
Exactly. Right. So shifting off a little bit, I guess we can segue it like this. There is a lot of contention over this topic, actually, specifically within the Republican Party. So not just focusing it on this specific issue, but like, how do you feel about the current state of the Republican Party and some of the infighting and the chaotic state
Yeah.
of affairs over at the old GOP?
Well, I obviously am chair of college Republicans,
Okay.
so I align myself with them.
Yeah.
I align myself with their values, though, specifically.
Sure.
And I think, we've talked about at some of our meetings how both you and I are conservatives. And we're
First.
conservatives before
Yeah.
we're Republicans.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the Republican Party is not this terrible party that some people make it out to be.
Yeah.
But I think it has its issues.
Yeah.
But I think we're also making a comeback. My biggest gripe with the Republican Party is just nothing gets done. It's just a bunch of people who are, if we're looking at, House and Senate and that type of stuff.
Yeah, and the way it's operated for
Right.
25 to 50 years. Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any type of cohesion of working together, even
Yeah.
between campaigns and
Yeah.
people from one side of the state to the other, from one state to another state. Like, there doesn't seem to be a lot of cohesion or communication. And I think ultimately that's something we need to work on. I mean, part of the reason we see Dems doing well on campuses is they obviously know how to organize themselves.
Yeah, they are
know how to bring
grassroots
in-
ballers. They
right.
know what they're doing.
They know how to bring in a giant inflatable cow that makes people go, what the heck is this doing on
Yeah,
our
right.
campus?
Think of Bernie Sanders to come on
Right.
a random Monday or whatever it
Right.
was. Yeah.
And so they are very good at working together, and I'll give them that. But I do think that, like I said, I think we're making a comeback. I think our generation and the generation above us is starting to work towards reform and change, and they're getting some guts.
Yeah.
They're getting out there, and they're not afraid to say what they think. I think of people like Charlie Kirk, Riley Gaines, some of these political commentators. They will come out and they will say exactly what they believe, and they will stand on that.
Yeah.
They won't back down, and that's what we need. And even thinking of some people in the local area who are kind of our age, who have run for local offices, they are not afraid to back down. I know Brady Penfield over in River Falls
Okay.
is very, very strong in his beliefs and doesn't back down, and he's run for a couple things now. And there's just a lot of young people like that who are rising up and I think are creating change within the Republican Party.
Great. I like that response. That's good. And before we wrap up this interview here, I think one final question, which is good for our listeners who are mainly college students. What advice would you give to students who are in the club and then who maybe aren't in the club but are on the fence?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you have to be willing to give politics a shot. I think there's a lot of people who don't want to dive into politics because it's politics.
Yeah.
And it just sounds like, I don't know what I think about that. But
right.
I think a lot of members in our club joined CR because they didn't know what else to join. And now they play an integral part of our club. And they
Yeah.
wouldn't have it any other way, They love it. And so give it a shot And nobody's saying you have to know what you're doing or know what you're saying completely. Just say, hey, I'm new to this, but I'm learning. And be willing to learn.
Yeah.
Start learning political history, learn how our country works, learn how a bill's passed.
Yeah. Learn how the government functions.
Right.
Yeah.
And sadly, a lot of people our age don't know that stuff, you know?
Yeah, right.
And, whether that's their own fault or the school's fault or their parents, I don't know
Right.
where you want to put that blame,
Sure.
but that's the reality of it. And so take the time to educate yourself and find an issue that matters to you. I think that helps a lot. If you have one issue, you can focus on that issue and you can really learn every part of that issue.
It's a good starting point.
Exactly. And then through that, you make connections of people who know something that you don't know as much about. And they help you learn. And then you start to, know about that issue a little more. And then another issue. And then, or maybe you just stick to your one issue, Figure out what works for you. And so overall, it's just being willing to take that step into it, I think. And be willing to stand up for what you believe in. It takes guts, but it's worth it. And, we've talked about a lot in this podcast that sometimes people are hated for what they believe. And it sucks, but that's how you know you're doing the right thing. I think a good draw to that is John 15:18 says, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. And, I think that that's just an important reminder and a little bit of encouragement for everyone out there who's maybe a little nervous about showing their face as a Republican. Like, yeah, there's going to be people and groups of people and, all these different just ideas that are coming at you that don't agree, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And don't back down.
Great. I like that. That's really good. It's inspiring to leave off with. So.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for listening to Right on Campus. We post this podcast weekly where we tackle current events and life as a conservative on campus. If you'd like to learn more about UWEC College Republicans, join our meetings on Monday nights in Centennial 1704 at 7 p.m. Just a reminder that we will not be hosting a meeting on Monday, March 17th, because the university is off for spring break. We invite you all to join us back for our first meeting back on campus after spring break on Monday, the 24th, at 7 p.m. in Centennial 1704. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at UWEC College Republicans. And be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and favorite and share this podcast if you're listening on Spotify. Have a great night. Thank you for listening to Right on Campus. We post this podcast once a week where we talk about current events and life as a conservative on campus. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at UWEC College Republicans. Have a great night and see you next time.